And I just want to judge the projected record with the simulation at the start of each month. You know, Joey, it's not really appropriate to update our audience on the simulator each week, but at the start of a new month, it's kind of necessary because it gives you a better idea. So my top 7 in the AFC and NFC remains the same. Unlike last year, where I did a few tweaks, my top 7 remains relatively the same so far. No major surprises yet, but there's still entire 3 months of NFL left. But I'm going to get into San Jose Sharks here. Macklin Celebrini did suffer an injury in the preseason. It's considered day-to-day. Doesn't matter. The Sharks are in a rebuild. I do like their first 2 lines. Eklund, Macklin, Celebrini, Tyler Toffoli, and then they've got Gronlund, Will Smith, and Zetterlund on the second line. Klim Kostin's the third line left winger. They got Barclay Goodrow and Ty Dellandrea as fourth line wingers. They brought in Luke Kunin. I think the Sharks did a nice job improving their wing depth. They don't have any good defensemen. They did get Cody Ceci from Edmonton, but he's listed as a second line defenseman. They also got Jake Wallman, the seventh best defenseman on the Red Wings, but he's going to be a second line defenseman with Cody Ceci. And what stands out with the Sharks is their second line defensive pairing is better than their first line defensive pairing, which is very interesting. They gave up a first round pick for Yaroslav Askarov, but the plan is to develop him in the AHL and start him next year. Mackenzie Blackwood and Vitek Vanasek are going to be the goalies. The Sharks already have 5 players injured. Macklin Celebrini, Yaroslav Askarov, the goalie they gave up a first-round pick for, Thomas Bordelot and Logan Couture, one of their centers who was on IR most of last year. He's already on IR to start the year this season. So the Sharks are going to be rebuilding. I'm not going to say much about the Sharks. I'll quickly go through Calgary. I have them at 7.
Hyundai Sonata versus Honda Accord.
I don't know why this.
Look what Sonata has.
Yeah, Daily Faceoff plays the ads.
Doesn't.
I don't know why they play the ads, but they do. That's one of the drawbacks of Daily Faceoff is they play their ads. But yeah, Calgary. They have Nazem Kadri. They have Huberdeau, who they got in the trade that sent Matthew Tkachuk to the Florida Panthers. But there's really not much there. It feels like Calgary's in a full rebuild. They're going to get a new stadium. I think they have to get the number 1 pick in one of these next 2 NHL drafts with a new stadium coming. That's what they need to get out of this rebuild. They really do need to have that number 1 pick. They got Zane Pareka in the 9th overall pick, and I really like their 2024 draft, but if neither Dustin Wolf or Daniel Vladar step up at goalie after trading Jacob Markstrom to the Devils, they're going to probably draft a goalie in the first round. Just depends. But Calgary is a team to keep an eye on this year.
Hyundai Santa Cruz versus Honda Ridgeline. Look what Santa Cruz has.
Yeah, I apologize for the sponsored content butting into our podcast. It's something I do not know how to control, but Zegras, Mason McTavish, Troy Terry are on the top line for the Ducks. Cutter Gauthier, who the Ducks traded for after he refused to sign his rookie deal with the Flyers. He's playing with Leo Carlson, Alex Killorn, Vetrano, Ryan Strome, Robbie Fabry. Third line, Brock McGinn, Isaac Lundstrom, and Brett Leeson are the fourth line players. And the Ducks have Olin Zellweger, Cam Fowler, Radko Gudas, Pavel Mintyukov. Gudas was a free agent they got from Florida last year when Florida lost the Stanley Cup to Vegas. Mintyukov, Fowler, Olin Zellweger are all players the Ducks drafted. 2010 first-round pick, 2021 second, 22 first-round pick, and then they've got Jackson Lacombe and Brian Dumoulin. So those are the defensemen. They also have Tristan Luneau and Noah Warren, their 222 second-round picks that were teammates on the Gatineau Olympiques. John Gibson, the starting goalie for the Ducks, is injured, so Lucas Dostal, the backup who played better than Gibson, takes over as the starter, and Kalle Klang, 2020 third-round pick drafted by the Pittsburgh Penguins, traded to Anaheim in the Ricard Raquel deal. 2 years of experience in the San Diego Gulls and AHL, takes over as the backup goalie, and Damian Clara, the 2023 second-round pick, is currently the starting goalie on the San Diego Gulls. I like what the Ducks have done in the draft the last 5 years. They brought back the old Mighty Ducks logo. They have these new orange jerseys. I like the direction the team's heading in. Unfortunately, they're still in a rebuild. I like their center depth and their defensemen, but I don't see a superstar winger on this team that puts them over the top. But they do have good depth. Well, Zegras is kind of a superstar, but he's always been more of a center than a left winger to me. They're moving him to left wing. So if him and Gauthier can step up at left wing, They'll have some stability at left wing. I would like to see a superstar right winger on the Ducks before I can put them in the playoff conversation. But they're definitely heading in the right direction, Joey. Like a lot of people say the Anaheim Ducks are going to be a bottom 5 team again, just like Chicago. I've got Chicago and Anaheim picking at 8 and 9 in my 25 NHL draft. But both teams, it's clear both teams are still rebuilding and neither one's ready to make the playoffs yet. It's pretty clear as daylight that's the case. But, I do like Anaheim bringing back the Mighty Ducks logo. I'll leave it at that. 10:48. I'm going to try to get through these 5 remaining teams in 12 minutes. We'll start with the Seattle Kraken, who I have finishing 5th in this division. The Kraken are interesting because they could challenge the Golden Knights for the final wild card in the Western Conference. They got Chandler Stevenson. They gave him an 8-year deal. Oliver Bjorkstrand, Jared McCann are on the top line with Matty Beniers. Eli Tolvin and Andre Burakovsky are both healthy. They're going to be playing with Stevenson. Shane Wright's done so well in camp that he's actually jumped Yanni Gourde as the third-line center. So that's progress for Shane Wright because we've been talking about Wright for a few years, waiting for him to take off. If he's already made enough progress where he's jumped the aging Yanni Gourde, who you signed from the Tampa Bay Lightning in free agency, if he's already jumped him on the roster, then that's very encouraging. Jaden Schwartz, Eberle, and Gourde still on this roster in a contract year with Brandon Tanev and Ty Cartey. Adam Larson, Vince Dunn, the 2-line 1 defensemen are back. Brandon Montour, former Florida Panthers number 3 defenseman, in that same role with the Kraken, 7-year contract. Jamie Alexiak, and then Riker Evans and Will Morgan are complimenting him. And then the goalies are Philip Grubauer, Joey Decord. I don't remember Joey Decord, but if Grubauer's healthy, the Kraken are going to be an interesting team. As long as the Kraken are healthy, I think they could be a dark horse to challenge. I think there's a few teams. You got Minnesota, you have Winnipeg, and you have Seattle. I think those are the 3 challengers to Vegas for the final wild card. I don't think any of those teams have enough pieces to dethrone Vegas yet. But if one of Vegas's key players gets injured, I could see one of these teams stepping up to the plate if they're healthy. But it's going to be very interesting to see. I'm not confident enough to bank on Seattle, Winnipeg, or Minnesota to jump Vegas in the standings, but those are 3 teams to keep an eye on depending on what happens with NHL injuries, Joey. I'm going to get to Vegas now. Vegas is interesting. I have them at 4th in this division, again, behind Vancouver, behind the LA Kings, and behind Edmonton. But William Karlsson, the third-line center, who's second-line center, is, he's dealing with an injury. Thomas Hurdle's the third-line center. Brett Howden, last year's fourth-line center, back. Victor Olofsson, he was a fourth-line right winger on Buffalo. He's on the top line with Eichel and Barbashev. Mark Stone's on the second line. Pavel Dorofeyev, he was not on Vegas last year, so he's the second-line left winger. Alexander Holtz, he was drafted 7th overall by the New Jersey Devils in 2020. He's currently the third-line left winger on the Vegas Golden Knights. Maybe a change of scenery is what Alexander Holtz needed. He was one of the best players in Sweden leading up to the 2020 draft, but he hasn't broke out like many expected him to. But Vegas trades for him. They know he's on a cheap deal. Peter Angelo and Shea Theodore are on the top line. Nicholas Hague, Noah Hannafin are on the second line. White Cloud and McNabb are on the third line. And they traded their starting goalie, Logan Thompson, away. They still have Aiden Hill, who led them to the Stanley Cup, but the backup is Ilya Samsonov, the former Washington Capitals goalie. He's drafted by the Capitals. He was on Toronto last year as Ilya Samsonov's the backup goalie now. That's an interesting addition. I still think Vegas has enough talent to be a playoff team, but it also feels like their Stanley Cup window is over. I mean, they lost Alec Martinez, their number 2 defenseman, to the Blackhawks. They lost Chandler Stevenson to Seattle. They lost Jonathan Marchessault, their leading point scorer, to the Nashville Predators. I still think Vegas is a playoff team, but I also feel like their window to win a Stanley Cup sort of ended when they won it in 2023. 2023 was like the last year of that Stanley Cup window, but there's still too many stars. Even though it's not a complete roster on paper, even though it's not the perfect team with 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies. The Vegas Golden Knights have too many superstars.
Hyundai Palisade versus Toyota Highlander. Look what Palisade has and what Highlander doesn't. Hyundai Palisade wins every time.
If they get the 2 seed, they could make it to the second round of the playoffs. If somebody knocks out Edmonton, they could make it back to the conference finals, but I think that's as far as they would get because the Central Division's just stacked this year. Dallas, Nashville, and Colorado all have rosters that could beat Vegas if somebody knocks out Edmonton. But I think their best hope is you get home ice against the 3 seed in the Central Division. If that happens, maybe you can get into another cup. But that's the best case scenario, and it's a very unlikely scenario, Joey. And that's why you say their window's barely still open. Because it comes down to a scenario like that in order for Vegas to get another crack at a cup. That's exactly right. I think that's exactly what would have to happen in order for Vegas to get another crack at a Stanley Cup. Vancouver Canucks are my number 3 team. Canucks were good last year. They won this division. They did get Elias. This can't be correct. Elias Peterson's on the Canucks now. Elias Peterson was drafted by the Canucks. He's on the second line. JT Miller's on the first line. DeBrusk, Boston Bruins winger, signs a 7-year deal with Vancouver. Vancouver really doesn't have a good left winger. They have Brock Boeser. They have Daniel Sprong, Elias Peterson, JT Miller. Atu Rati, the Islanders 2021 second-round pick that they got in the trade that sent Bo Horvat to the Islanders, is now the third-line center. Nils Hoglander's there. Teddy Bluger, Penguins fourth-line center during their 2 Stanley Cups. He was a good fourth-line center when Vegas won the Cup. He's the fourth-line center. Vancouver's got a lot of center depth, but the lack of star power at winger is really not what you'd like it to be. Hughes and Hronik are a great first-line tandem. Tyler Myers is back. Carson Soucy, they got him in free agency. And then Vincent Descharnes and Derek Forbort. I think their third-line defense is much weaker than a year ago. But their goalie, Thatcher Demko, Artur Siljovs, is Kevin Lankinen are back. Interesting. So Thatcher Demko hasn't recovered from the injury he suffered from in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Because a big reason Vancouver won the division last year, Joey, is their stars avoided injuries during the regular season. Demko, Quinn Hughes, Elias Peterson all stayed healthy. And usually those guys don't play all 82 games, but they did last year. That was a big reason why Vancouver won the division. I think Vancouver still hasn't enough talent to get back to the playoffs, but they might be a 3 seed. I have them losing in the first round. My number 2 seed is the Los Angeles Kings, to much surprise. I might be overvaluing the Kings. You can make the argument that Vancouver or Vegas should be at 2. Quentin Byfield, the number 2 pick in the 2020 NHL draft, really having a dominant preseason. Anze Kopitar and Byfield are your top 2 centers. You got some wingers in free agency and trades. Alex Lafreniere and Adrian Kemper on the top line. Kevin Fiala and Warren Fogle, who was a key player on the Oilers in last year's playoffs, they're the 2 second-line wingers. Tanner Jeannot, Trevor Moore on the third line. You have Akil Thomas, your 2018 first-round pick, and Trevor Lewis in the fourth line. Brant Clark, the Kings 2021 first-round pick that I praised for a few years, he's currently listed as the third-line defenseman. The big problem with the Kings is Drew Doughty having a knee surgery that he's going to be out 10 to 14 weeks. Drew Doughty, number 2 pick in the 2008 NHL draft, 2-time Stanley Cup champion. He's been the Kings' best defenseman for over a decade now. He's going to be out 10 to 14 weeks to start the year. The Kings also got Darcy Cooper, the Capitals goalie. I do think the Kings have a better roster than advertised, but as long as Doughty is out, they're going to be in a lot of shootouts where their offense has to win them games. And that's the most concerning thing with me about the Kings. Like right now, there is not a clear-cut challenger to Edmonton. I guess Joey would go with Vegas because of their history, but it's not something he has a lot of confidence in. And finally, we'll get to Edmonton here. They're going to pay McDavid and they're going to pay next summer. They paid Draisaitl $14 million for 8 years. He's a second line They have Nugent Hopkins and Hyman still as the top line forwards. Victor Arvidsson, he's going to be the second line right winger on the Edmonton Oilers. He was the LA Kings second line right winger last year. Jeff Skinner, he was on the Buffalo Sabres, got demoted to the third line, but he signs a cheap team-friendly deal with Edmonton to be the second line left winger. Matthias Janmark, third line left winger. Adam Henrique remains the third line center. Connor Brown remains the third line right winger, and Corey Perry is the fourth line right winger. But you have Noah Phillip. I don't even know who this guy is. He doesn't even have a Oiler jersey. The jersey is white on daily faceoff. And Vasily Podkolzin, a top 10 pick in the 2019 NHL draft, is the new fourth line left winger on the Oilers. Matthias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard are the top two defensemen. Ty Emberson, I've never heard of Ty Emberson, is going to be complimenting Darnell Nurse in the second line. And then Troy Stetcher and Brett Kulak. I picked the Oilers to win the Stanley Cup, but I'm looking at their roster now. It looks a lot weaker without some of the role players they had, Joey. You know, like Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg. Philip Broberg was a top 10 pick in the 2019 draft. The Oilers drafted him in the top 10. They traded him to the Blues because they couldn't afford to pay all these guys because they got to pay Draisaitl. They got to pay McDavid next summer. They got to pay Bouchard, who's an RFA next summer. They got to pay their goalie, who's a 2026 UFA. They can't pay all those guys with limited cap space, so they traded a lot of their core role players from last year's Cup team away. I mean, I am still picking Edmonton to win the Cup, but looking at this roster, I'm not as confident in that prediction now. To be fair to the Oilers, Derek Ryan, one of their centers, is injured, and Evander Kane, their second line right winger from last year, is out. Those two injuries have hindered this roster to a degree. I'm not as confident as my initial prediction. What's even crazier, Joey, is 8 out of 9 NHL experts have the Oilers winning the Cup. 8 out of 9. So they have gotten overhyped to a degree because they beat Dallas. They could, if their stars show up like they did in last year's playoffs, they're the team to beat in the NHL next year. Zero question about that. But their third line, I don't know if it's going to have as much chemistry. I mean, Connor Brown was a great fourth line right winger last year. He's going to be on the third line. Janmark's a good third line winger. Podkolzin, Noah Phillips just filling in for Derek Ryan, who was the fourth line center last year. I do think if they're fully healthy, this is the best team in the league, but you know, their defense doesn't look as good as last year. I've never heard of Ty Emberson. He wasn't on the Oilers. Troy Stretcher wasn't on the Oilers last year. Neither was Kulak. So if Edmonton doesn't win the conference, it's probably going to be due to defense. And I do think the two best teams in the league this year are Edmonton and Dallas. Dallas had home ice against Edmonton last year, but Edmonton had better power play, better penalty killing, and Dallas just didn't seize those opportunities with home ice in the conference finals, and Edmonton won every game in front of their home crowd. It's the big reason why Florida ended up playing Edmonton instead of Dallas. And if Dallas had won the conference, home ice would have gone through Dallas. And you look at Florida last year, they won their first 3 games, but they lost 3 in a row to Edmonton, and then it went to game 7 and they won at home. If they had played Dallas and this cup had turned out like that, Dallas probably wins in 7 with home ice, but we'll never know. I'm not taking anything away from Florida. They were the best team in the league last year. But yeah, Edmonton, I think it's going to come down to Edmonton or Dallas, Joey. I think those are the two best teams. It just depends on who comes out of the conference. And if neither Edmonton or Dallas wins the conference, I'm looking at Colorado, I'm looking at Nashville, and then it's really hard to determine who that number 5 team would be. It could be LA, it could be Vancouver, it could be Vegas. I think it all just depends. But I think the Western Conference is significantly stronger than the East, Joey. But I'm still going to go with a Canadian Stanley Cup. Edmonton over Toronto. That is my prediction. Do you have a cup prediction? It's 11:02. I need to start the third live stream and message Bill. If you don't have a cup prediction, I'll end this live stream and message Bill about coming onto the live stream. Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner. All right. You got a cup prediction, or should we just you can make it at the start of the playoffs if you prefer to do that. Because I know you're not as into hockey as I am, and that's fine. You can wait it out, see what the field looks like.